true love finds its way. Not even social differences can stand in its path. Prepare yourself for a beautiful love story that will move you deeply. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from and be a part of this special moment. Our story begins at 6:30 in the morning when Sofia's alarm clock blared with a cruelty that seemed reserved just for her. She opened her eyes slowly, feeling the weight of a chronic exhaustion that no night of intermittent sleep could ever dispel. Beside her, in the crib she had assembled with trembling hands, her daughter Lucía slept, oblivious to her mother's daily battles. At only 4 months old, she was the absolute center of Sofia's universe, her anchor and her engine. "Good morning, my little star," Sofia whispered, leaning in to kiss her forehead. That simple gesture was her ritual of strength, the daily reminder of why every sacrifice, every lost hour of sleep, and every counted coin was worth it in her silent struggle. In the tiny kitchen, which was more of a widened hallway, Sofia prepared a black coffee, bitter and strong. Sugar had become an optional luxury since Lucia's expenses took top priority in her budget. As the water boiled, her mind was already on autopilot, organizing a daily choreography of survival. She had to be at the Innovatec Solutions headquarters by 8 o'clock to clean 3 floors of the imposing glass building, ensuring the meeting rooms were spotless, and, most importantly, praying that the breast milk she would leave with her neighbor, Isabel, would be enough to soothe Lucia's hunger during her absence. Isabel, a 60-year-old widow who lived next door, had been a gift from heaven. A substitute grandmother who cared for Lucia without asking for anything in return. Beyond the joy the baby's laughter brought to her quiet home. At 7:15, with almost military precision, Sofia gently knocked on Isabel's door. The bag containing diapers, ointment, and 2 bottles of milk she had expressed in the early morning hours weighed on her shoulder, but not as heavily as the tightness in her chest. Isabel opened the door with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of her kind eyes, an expression that was a balm for Sofia's soul. "Good morning, my child. How was our little champion's night?" "She only woke up twice. I think she's finally getting used to it," Sofia lied, hiding that it had actually been a terrible night, filled with inexplicable crying. She handed Lucia over with infinite care, and the baby, still half asleep, snuggled into Isabel's arms, as if recognizing that safe haven. "Go on. Go to work peacefully. Everything will be fine here. You know this little girl is the light of my days," Isabel said, ignoring the sadness in the young mother's eyes. Each farewell was a small tear, a painful surrender of her role as a full-time mother that left her feeling incomplete. The 20-minute bicycle ride to Innovatec Solutions was a time Sofia used as a strange form of forced meditation. She pedaled through the still deserted streets of the working-class neighborhood, feeling the cool morning air on her face as the city lazily awoke around her. It was one of the few moments of peace in her day, an instant where only she, the steady rhythm of her legs, and the asphalt existed. In the distance, silhouetted against the sky like an unattainable promise, the Innovatec building stood as a monolith of glass and steel. It was the fortress of Alejandro Montes, the company's young and successful CEO, a name she only knew from the business magazines she sometimes found in the executives' wastebaskets. For Sophia, that building was not a place of opportunity and dreams, but a concrete jungle where she fought anonymously to survive, one floor at a time, with her cleaning cart as her only weapon and shield. At 8 o'clock sharp, Sophia entered through the service door of Innovatec, clocked in, and headed to the cleaning staff's locker room, a gloomy, functional basement that contrasted violently with the bright, modern floors above. Carmen, the supervisor, was waiting for her there, a woman in her 50s, with her hair in a severe bun, but with a gaze that betrayed a deep empathy, forged over decades in the trade. "Everything all right, Sophia? You look exhausted," she said in a low voice, handing her the day's work plan. "The usual, Carmen. New mom nights." Nearby, Raquel, another cleaner with more seniority, watched the brief interaction with an almost imperceptible sneer. Raquel had always viewed Sophia with a mixture of envy and suspicion. The newcomer's youth and the compassion she elicited from the supervisor were, to her, a personal affront to her own journey of silent, unrecognized sacrifice. She said nothing, but her silence was eloquent, a quiet judgment that categorized Sophia's fatigue not as a worthy struggle, but as a weakness she would never allow herself to show. Sophia began her daily routine on the highest floor, the fourth, the sanctuary of upper management. Mr. Montes, the CEO, was away at an important conference abroad, so the floor was practically deserted, shrouded in a solemn silence that Sophia found almost sacred. She cleaned his office with special care, a huge room with an imposing mahogany desk, shelves filled with books on business strategy, and a panoramic view of the entire city that took her breath away. Sometimes, as she ran a cloth over the perfectly polished surface of the desk, she allowed herself to daydream for a few seconds. She imagined what it would be like to work in a place like this, to wear elegant clothes, to have a university degree, and above all, not to have to count every penny, to know if she could afford baby formula in case her own milk, from stress and exhaustion, dried up. But they were just that, fleeting fantasies that she swept from her mind with the same efficiency she used on the dust. She had a job to do, and there was no time for regrets. On the third floor, the atmosphere changed completely. The solemn silence of management was replaced by the constant hum of administrative activity, the incessant clicking of keyboards, and the ringing of telephones. Here, Sophia's invisibility was even more pronounced. She would say, "Good morning," in a soft voice to the employees she passed. Some would respond with a distracted nod. Others wouldn't even look up from their screens, completely absorbed in their own urgent tasks. Sophia didn't take it personally. She had long since learned to build a shell to protect herself from indifference. She knew her place in this complex corporate ecosystem and performed her work with a quiet dignity, moving with an efficiency that made her almost imperceptible. She was a uniformed ghost who kept the world of others in order, a necessary but ignored shadow, whose only wish was for the hours to pass quickly so she could return to her daughter's arms, the only place where she felt truly seen and valued. It was almost noon while she was cleaning the cafeteria area when her mobile phone, tucked in her uniform pocket on vibrate, began to tremble insistently. Sophia's heart hammered so violently she had to lean on her cart to keep from falling. Seeing Isabel's name on the screen, a cold sweat ran down her back. Isabel never, under any circumstances, called her during work hours unless it was a life or death emergency. She hid in the small supply closet on the second floor, surrounded by the strong smell of bleach and air freshener, and answered with a trembling voice, "Isabel, what's wrong?" Her neighbor's voice was tense and distressed. "Sophia, dear, you have to do something. I don't know what else to try." Lucia won't stop crying. She's been like this for over 2 hours. She won't take the bottle at all. She pushes it away with her tongue and screams, as if something is hurting her. I think, I think she just wants her mommy." Sophia felt the floor disappear from beneath her feet as, in the background, she heard her daughter's sharp, inconsolable cry, a sound that shattered her soul into 1,000 pieces. "What do you mean she won't take it? She took the bottle just fine yesterday," Sophia stammered, her mind blank, refusing to accept reality. Her maternal instinct screamed at her to run, to drop everything and go to her daughter's side. But the cold, cruel logic of her situation kept her anchored to the linoleum floor of the closet. Innovatec's rules were incredibly strict and enforced with relentless rigidity. Abandoning your post without authorization was forbidden, and bringing personal visitors, especially a baby, was unthinkable. Losing this job was not an option. It meant eviction, hunger, absolute failure as the sole provider for Lucia. The small closet, which seconds before had been a refuge, suddenly became a suffocating cage. The smell of chemicals turned her stomach. She felt trapped, torn between two immovable forces: her daughter's urgent need and the obligation to keep the only livelihood she had to protect her future. At that moment, Lucia's cry on the other end of the phone intensified, a sharp sound full of pure pain that struck Sophia's conscience like a whip. And in that precise moment, nothing else mattered. Not the company rules, not the fear of being fired, not the opinions of others. Her daughter needed her now. Long-term survival meant nothing if she couldn't soothe her immediate suffering. "Isabel, listen to me," she said, with a determination forged in the fire of maternal love, a voice she didn't know she possessed. Can you bring her here? I know it's crazy, but please, I'll talk to my supervisor. I'll find a solution, whatever it takes." Without waiting for a reply, she hung up, her hands trembling with a mixture of panic and adrenaline. She burst out of the closet and raced through the second floor corridors with the urgency of a lioness searching for her cub. Her mind had a single objective: find Carmen. She finally saw her at the end of a long hallway and ran towards her. "Carmen," she exclaimed, her voice broken. "I need your help, please. It's an emergency with my daughter." Carmen, who was about to reprimand an employee for leaving a coffee mug in the hall, turned sharply at the sound of Sophia's desperate cry. The stern expression on her face, a mask she wore to maintain order, vanished instantly when she saw the pure panic in the young woman's eyes. In that look, she recognized a universal anguish, that of a mother fearing for her child's well-being, a primal emotion that transcends any work regulation or hierarchy. Sophia explained the situation in fits and starts, her voice cracking with sobs, speaking of Lucia's incessant crying and her inexplicable refusal of the bottle. Carmen listened in silence, her brow furrowed not with disapproval, but with deep concentration. In her mind, the strict rules of Innovatec warred with her protective instincts. She had seen many girls like Sophia over the years, young fighters facing the world alone, and she had always had a special weakness for them. She knew that helping her meant risking her own job, but ignoring her meant betraying her own humanity. Calm down, Sophia. Take a deep breath, Carmen said, in a firm but reassuring voice, taking the young woman by the shoulders to ground her in reality. We're going to solve this together. Her mind worked at full speed, evaluating the options. The locker rooms were too crowded. The meeting rooms on the second and third floors had glass walls, and anyone could look inside. Then, a bold, risky, and completely unorthodox idea formed in her mind. Listen, Mr. Montes is on a trip to Asia. The fourth floor is completely empty, and nobody, absolutely nobody, goes up there unless it's an emergency. His office is large and has a comfortable sofa. It's the most private place in the entire building. Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. But what if someone sees us? That's my problem. You go down to the service entrance and wait for your neighbor. I'll go up first and make sure no one is around. I'll be your eyes and ears. I'll call you when the coast is clear. Now go, and don't let anyone see you. Sophia felt a wave of gratitude so immense that words failed her. She could only nod, tears of relief and fear rolling down her cheeks, before running towards the service elevator. 20 minutes later, which for Sophia felt like an eternity of anguish, Isabel arrived at the service entrance. The older woman looked as exhausted as Sophia, her face etched with worry. In her arms, Lucia was a small, trembling bundle, red from so much crying. Her little body twisted in desperation, and her wail was a high-pitched sound that seemed too large for such a small body. But the instant the baby's eyes, clouded with tears, met her mother's, her expression changed. The frantic crying transformed into a pitiful whimper, a direct call to Sophia's heart. My baby, my life, I'm here now, Sophia murmured, taking Lucia into her arms. The baby clung to her with surprising strength, burying her face in her mother's neck, seeking her scent and her warmth like a castaway searching for solid ground. She didn't stop crying completely, but her cries were no longer of panic, but of comfort and reproach. It's like she knew you were far away, Isabel said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Just then, Sophia's phone vibrated. It was a text from Carmen, brief and direct. Come up now. Service elevator. I'll wait for you on the fourth floor. Quick, and don't be seen. With a silent thank you to Isabel, who promised to wait discreetly in a nearby cafe in case she was needed, Sophia hurried to the elevator. The ride up was suffocating. Inside the cramped metal box, the only sounds were Lucia's soft sobs and the wild thumping of Sophia's own heart, which echoed in her ears like a war drum. Each floor they passed tightened the knot of anxiety in her stomach. When the doors slid open on the fourth floor, Carmen was there, her expression serious and watchful. Follow me. Don't make a sound, she whispered. Sophia followed her down a hallway, carpeted so thickly that their footsteps were completely muffled. The walls were adorned with modern art, and the light filtering through the large windows was soft and golden. It was a world of luxury and power, and Sophia felt as if she were defiling it with her humble, desperate presence. Carmen stopped before an imposing dark wood door and opened it carefully. In here, quickly. Alejandro Montes's office was larger than Sophia's entire apartment. Glass walls offered a 180-degree view of the city, an urban landscape stretching to the horizon like a map of unattainable opportunities. A massive, minimalist designer desk dominated the center of the room, but what caught Sophia's eye was a plush black leather sofa in one corner, beside a floor lamp that cast a warm, inviting glow. Sit there. You'll be more comfortable. I'll watch the door from the hall. If I hear the slightest noise, I'll warn you, Carmen whispered, before closing the door gently, leaving Sophia and Lucia in a bubble of silence and opulence. With trembling hands, Sophia sat on the sofa, its leather impossibly soft to the touch. She discreetly unbuttoned her coarse work uniform and brought Lucia to her breast. The baby, as if she had been waiting for this moment all morning, latched on with a desperate eagerness. Her tiny fists, which had been clenched in tension, relaxed against her mother's blouse. Her sobs ceased instantly, replaced by the soft, rhythmic sound of her nursing. Sophia closed her eyes, a wave of relief so profound it was almost painful washing over her. The moment was almost perfect, an island of peace in the ocean of chaos that was her life. Sophia stroked Lucia's fine, soft hair, whispering words of love, feeling for the first time in weeks whole and exactly where she was meant to be. But fate, with its sharp sense of irony, had other plans. Out in the hallway, the distinctive, nearly inaudible chime of the private executive elevator arriving on the floor sent a chill down Carmen's spine. She glanced at her watch, utterly confused. It was barely 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. Mr. Montes wasn't supposed to be back from his trip to Asia until the following Monday. Panic seized her as she heard familiar, energetic, and determined footsteps echoing on the marble of the lobby. Sophia, Carmen hissed, slipping back into the office, her face as pale as paper. Pack up quickly, someone's here. But it was too late. As Sophia fumbled to cover herself, startling Lucia, who began to cry again at the interruption. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. A tense silence filled the air. Then, slowly, inexorably, the doorknob began to turn. The door swung open, and the tall, imposing figure of Alejandro Montes filled the doorway. His tie was loosened, and his face wore an expression of deep exhaustion from an intercontinental flight he had decided to cut a day short to get ahead on his work. He stopped dead, completely paralyzed by the scene in his personal sanctuary. His brain, accustomed to processing financial statements and complex market strategies in milliseconds, failed to comprehend what his eyes were seeing. There, on his leather sofa, was one of the cleaning staff, her company uniform discreetly unbuttoned, breastfeeding a baby. The golden afternoon light from the window created a soft halo around them, transforming a scene of desperation into something strangely beautiful and sacred, almost like a Renaissance painting. He saw the look of pure terror on the young woman's face, the silent panic in the eyes of Carmen, her supervisor, and the unconscious serenity of the tiny being feeding, oblivious to the storm that had just broken. Sophia's face burned with the deepest shame she had ever felt. With an instinctive, clumsy movement, she tried to cover herself and stand up at the same time, nearly jolting Lucia from her placid state. Sir, I'm so sorry. I can explain, she stammered, her voice trembling, expecting a shout, a public humiliation. the immediate dismissal she felt she deserved for her audacity. Carmen, for her part, was petrified, unable to speak, already assuming full responsibility and bracing for the worst. But the shout never came. Instead, Alejandro raised a hand, his calm so surprising it stunned both women. "Don't get up," he said softly, his voice barely a murmur. "Please, continue. Don't let me interrupt her." He stepped into the office and closed the door behind him with a soft click, a gesture that seemed to isolate the scene from the rest of the world. He approached slowly, not like a furious boss, but like someone afraid of breaking a delicate spell. His eyes, which Sophia had always imagined as cold and calculating, now held a genuine, profound curiosity. He stopped a few feet away, and instead of asking what they were doing there, his gaze settled on the baby. "What's her name?" he asked, his gentleness completely disarming Sophia. The question, so simple and human, broke the tension like a pinprick to a balloon. Sophia swallowed hard, trying to find her voice as fear and shame warred within her. "Lu, Lucia," she whispered, not daring to look up from her daughter's face. "Her name is Lucia." Feeling an overwhelming need to justify her presence in this sacred space, she began to recount Isabel's frantic call, the baby's incessant crying, and her own desperation. As she spoke, her voice breaking, Alejandro heard more than just the words. He watched the young mother, her fragility and strength intertwined in a way that mesmerized him. And for the first time in many years, something stirred deep within his soul. He who lived in a world of logic, of contracts, and of a self-imposed, armored solitude was witnessing something primitive and pure, unconditional love in its rawest, most real form. He returned each night to a luxurious but empty designer penthouse, and suddenly his own office, the epicenter of his empire, had been filled with a life and a purpose he had never known. "Lucia," Alejandro repeated, testing the name on his lips as if it were an exotic word. "It's a beautiful name. And how old is she?" "4 months," Sophia replied, growing more and more surprised by the turn the conversation was taking. Lucia, having finished eating, was now half asleep in a state of milky bliss. She released her mother's breast and fixed her gaze on the stranger with large, dark, curious eyes, the exact same eyes as Sophia. She's She's absolutely beautiful," Alejandro said, and there was a genuine emotion in his voice that Sophia could not ignore. To lessen the power imbalance between them, he sat on the edge of his own desk, a deliberate gesture to appear less like the master of the universe and more like a simple man. With an almost shy hesitation, he extended an index finger toward the baby. "May I?" Sophia nodded, and Lucia, with the blind trust of the innocent, grasped Alejandro's finger with her tiny hand, squeezing with surprising strength. A smile, the first sincere, unforced smile in a long time, spread across Alejandro's face. "Wow, what a grip! She's going to be a determined woman, just like her mother." At that moment, Carmen, who had remained silent by the door like a statue, decided it was time to intervene and take responsibility before the situation spun even further out of control. She took a step forward, her back straight, with the dignity of someone preparing for a sentence. "Mr. Montes, the fault is entirely mine. I gave Sophia the idea to come here. I saw her desperation and I made an executive decision, even though I didn't have the authority. Sophia is one of our best employees, always punctual, hardworking. She's never caused a single problem. If there is to be any disciplinary action, it must be for me. No, the final decision was mine, Sophia interrupted, finding a sliver of courage in the depths of her fear. I asked my neighbor to bring her. I've never missed a day, never been late. Today was an exception. My daughter needed me. I'll work whatever overtime is necessary to make up for this time. I swear. Both women offered themselves as a sacrifice, awaiting the verdict of the man who held their professional futures in the palm of his hand. Alejandro listened to them in silence, his gaze shifting from Carmen's protective loyalty to Sophia's dignified desperation. Finally, he sighed, not with annoyance, but with a kind of melancholic resignation. There is nothing to make up for, and there will be no disciplinary action for either of you, he said, with a firmness that allowed for no argument. You, Carmen, showed more humanity and better judgment than any human resources manual ever could. You did the right thing. And you, Sophia, did what any good mother would have done. If my company's policies force a mother to choose between her child's well-being and her job, then my company's policies are what's wrong, not you. He stood up from the desk and walked to the large window, turning his back to them for a moment as he gazed out at the city below. How do you do it? He asked the air, his voice more reflective than inquisitive. How do you manage to work 8 hours a day away from her with this constant worry? It can't be easy. The question, so direct and empathetic, caught Sophia by surprise. The tears she had been holding back threatened to spill over. It isn't, she admitted in a whisper. But I don't have another choice. Alejandro turned to look at her, a new determination in his eyes. Perhaps you do. Alejandro's words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning that neither Sophia nor Carmen dared to interpret. A bewildering silence settled over the office, broken only by the soft, even breathing of Lucía, who had fallen fast asleep in her mother's arms, content and safe. I think we should go, Carmen finally said, her voice still trembling with adrenaline. Thank you, Mr. Montes. Truly, thank you for your understanding. Alejandro just nodded, his gaze fixed on Sophia, a look so intense and filled with an unknown emotion that she couldn't hold it and had to look away. Clutching her daughter as if she were the world's most fragile treasure, Sophia stood up and, without daring to say another word, left the office. The walk back down the plush hallway and the descent in the service elevator were a blur. Her mind was a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. The shame of being discovered, the immense relief of not being fired, and a strange new unease sparked by the CEO's last sentence. What had he meant by, perhaps you do? Was it false hope, a momentary kindness, or something more? Alejandro remained standing by the window long after they had gone, staring at the city without really seeing it. His office, his fortress of solitude and power, felt irrevocably different. The silence was no longer peaceful. It now seemed to echo with the real life that had invaded it for a brief moment. He thought he could detect the faintest scent of milk and baby, a scent of home, of humanity that had never before permeated these sterile walls. He walked slowly to the sofa and ran his hand over the leather where Sophia had sat. For the first time in a decade, he felt profoundly disconnected from his own company, not from its finances or operations, but from its beating heart. The people who worked for him, whose lives and struggles he knew nothing about. The image of Sophia, her eyes frightened but filled with a fierce maternal dignity, would not leave his mind. He pulled out his phone, but instead of calling a business partner in Tokyo, he dialed the head of human resources. Marta, good afternoon. I need you to get me some information on an employee in the cleaning department. Her name is Sophia. Sophia. One moment, he realized with a pang of self-loathing that he didn't even know her last name. Find out, please. I want to know everything about her situation and do it discreetly. The days that followed that Thursday were a strange torture of normalcy for Sophia. She returned to her cleaning routine, pushing her cart down the same hallways using the same chemical sprays. But everything felt irrevocably changed. Every time the elevator rose toward the fourth floor, her heart hammered with a mixture of panic and an absurd anticipation she dared not name. She expected to run into Mr. Montes at any moment, to be called into HR for a talk, or worse, to find a termination letter in her locker. But absolutely nothing happened. The silence from upper management was absolute, a dense and unnerving void. Carmen advised her to keep a low profile. Don't make waves, she'd said. Just keep working as you always have. The less they see of us, the better. Meanwhile, Raquel, the other cleaner, watched Sophia with a growing, hawk-like suspicion. She had noted her prolonged absence the other day, and the strange mix of relief and confusion on her face when she returned. Raquel's sharp instinct for drama and conflict told her that something significant had transpired on the upper floors, and she was determined to uncover it. At the same time, in the silent opulence of the fourth floor, Alejandro Montes sat at his mahogany desk. Before him lay a thin blue folder, its label bearing two words, Sofia Vargas. The report from Human Resources was concise, cold, and bureaucratic. Sofia Vargas, 24 years old, employee for 2 years. Performance evaluations, excellent. Attendance and punctuality, impeccable. Marital status, single. Daughter, Lucía Vargas, 4 months. Father of the child, not registered. Each data point was like a dull thud, a brutal contrast to the vivid image seared into his memory. A brave young mother, cradling her child with infinite tenderness. The information only deepened his fascination. He spent the next few days immersed in meetings, but his mind was elsewhere. He found himself watching the women in his company, wondering how many others were fighting similar battles in silence. The idea that had sparked in his office began to take shape, to grow into a project. He decided he could not, would not, leave things as they were. He needed to speak with Sophia again, but this time it wouldn't be by chance. It would be with a clear purpose. On Friday morning, nearly a week after the incident, Alejandro put his plan into motion. He knew from the schedule he'd requested from Carmen that Sophia cleaned his floor first thing. He sat at his desk, pretending to review documents, but in reality, he was listening intently for any sound in the hallway, feeling a strange anxiety he didn't even experience in the most tense negotiations. When he heard the soft squeak of the cleaning cart's wheels approaching, his own heart quickened. He left his office door strategically ajar. Sophia passed by, casting a fleeting, fearful glance inside, likely to ensure it was empty, and then continued on her way. Sophia, a moment, please. Alejandro's voice was calm and firm, yet it resonated in the corridor's silence. Sophia froze, a chill of panic shooting down her spine. She turned slowly, her face a mask of pale apprehension. Could you come in? I'd like to speak with you. To her, the request sounded like a professional death sentence. With sweaty hands gripping the handle of her cart as if it were a life raft, Sophia nodded and entered the office that had already become the stage for the most intense emotions of her life. Alejandro watched her enter, noting her nervousness and the way she avoided his gaze at all costs. He gestured for her to sit in one of the elegant chairs opposite his desk, a gesture intended to be polite, but which only served to emphasize the enormous barrier of power that separated them. He remained standing. Don't worry, you're not in trouble, he began, trying to dispel the palpable tension. How is Lucia? Is she eating well again? The question took her by surprise. That he would remember her daughter's name and ask about her well-being was something she could never have anticipated. She's fine, sir. Thank you for asking. She started taking the bottle again the next day. I'm glad to hear that, he said, and his smile seemed genuine. Then his tone grew more serious. Sophia, I want you to be honest with me. I need to understand something. What is the hardest part of being a working mother in this company? For a moment, forget I'm your boss. Talk to me as a person. What are the real needs that employees like you have that my company is so obviously ignoring? Sophia looked up, completely disarmed by the frankness of the question. She met an intense, genuinely expectant gaze, and for the first time, she considered the astonishing possibility that her voice, the voice of an anonymous cleaner, could actually matter in this building. The fear of speaking up, of complaining, of being labeled a difficult and ungrateful employee, warred within her against the unique opportunity, perhaps the only one in her life, to be heard. She thought of Lucia, of the sleepless nights, of the money that never stretched far enough, of the dull anguish that was her constant companion. A wave of courage, born of desperation, washed over her. She decided to take the risk. The uncertainty, sir, she began, her voice low but steady. It's the constant uncertainty. It's not knowing if the money will cover diapers and formula if my own milk fails. It's the panic of getting a call from the sitter because your child has a fever, knowing you have no paid sick days to care for her. It's having to pump milk in a bathroom stall because there is no dignified, private place to do it. It's the guilt, a terrible, gnawing guilt for leaving your baby for so many hours and the constant fear of being fired for the slightest mistake because there are 100 other people willing to take your place without asking questions. Alejandro listened to every word without interruption. His face remained as impassive as a poker player's, but inside, his world was collapsing. Each of Sophia's sentences was a hammer blow, demolishing the ivory tower he had built around himself. Details that were trivialities to him, the cost of diapers, the lack of a lactation room, were monumental obstacles that defined her daily existence. He felt like a complete and utter idiot. He had implemented corporate wellness programs with yoga classes and free fruit, sincerely believing he was creating a modern, supportive work environment, all while ignoring the most basic human needs of a fundamental part of his workforce. Sofia's raw honesty showed him the abysmal gap between his perception as CEO and the reality of his employees. It wasn't just a matter of policy, it was a matter of blindness, of a fundamental lack of empathy for which he now felt profoundly ashamed. Sophia's story wasn't just her story, it was the story of so many others. And he, as their leader, had failed them spectacularly. When Sophia finished speaking, a heavy silence filled the office. She lowered her gaze, her heart pounding, terrified she had said too much, that she had crossed an invisible line from which there was no return. She expected a polite but distant response, perhaps a "thank you for your feedback, we'll take it into consideration," and then to be dismissed back to her cleaning cart and her anonymity. But Alejandro moved. To her astonishment, he sat down in the chair opposite her, completely eliminating the barrier of the desk. He looked her directly in the eye. "Thank you, Sophia," he said, with a seriousness that sent a tremor through her. "Thank you for your honesty. What you just did required more courage than many of my directors have shown in their entire careers." He leaned forward, his intensity almost overwhelming. "I'm not going to offer you an apology because empty words are useless. I want action, and I need your help to make it happen. I want you to work directly with me on a project to redesign this company's benefits program from the ground up. I want you to be my advisor, my expert on life. I want you to help me build a workplace where no mother ever has to go through what you're going through. And the very first thing on the list will be creating a quality daycare center right here in this building." Sophia stared at him, her brain failing to process the avalanche of information. Advisor, a personal project with the CEO, a daycare at Innovatec? The proposal was so surreal, so impossibly far from her reality, that for a moment she thought she was dreaming, or that the stress had finally made her lose her mind. A nervous laugh, which sounded more like a choked sob, escaped her lips. "Sir, with all due respect, I think there's been a mistake. I'm a cleaner," she said, as if she needed to remind both him and herself. "I don't have a university degree. I don't know anything about human resources or finance. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I'm not qualified for something like this, really." Her voice faded, heavy with an insecurity born from years of feeling invisible and undervalued. The idea that she, Sofia Vargas, could have something of value to offer beyond her ability to leave a surface gleaming was as alien as the notion of a fish taking flight. She looked at her hands, calloused from work, then around the luxurious office, feeling the unbridgeable abyss between her world and the one he was inexplicably offering her. "Not qualified?" Alejandro repeated with a half smile, as if the idea were the most absurd thing he had ever heard. "Sophia, you're wrong. You are the single most qualified person out of the 2,000 employees in this building for this job. And I'll tell you why. I don't need another consultant with an MBA presenting me with empty charts and statistics on talent retention. I have dozens of them, and not one has been able to see what you've shown me in 5 minutes. What I need is reality. I need someone who has lived the consequences of my corporate policies firsthand. I need someone who knows the fear, the guilt, and the uncertainty you spoke of. Your life experience isn't a weakness, it's your greatest asset. Your honesty is your best credential, and the love you have for your daughter is the most powerful motivation that exists. I will give you the tools, the resources, and the support. But the vision, the human perspective, that has to come from you. You can't learn that in any university. Sophia listened, and every word he spoke was like a piece falling into place in a puzzle she didn't even know she was building inside her soul. The way he saw her struggles, not as a burden or a misfortune, but as a source of knowledge and value, was utterly revolutionary. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever seen her like that. To the world, she was just a single mother, a cleaner. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now joined by a new, warm emotion that began to spread through her chest. Hope. She thought of Lucia. She thought of being able to work without that constant anguish, of knowing her daughter was close, safe, in a quality daycare just a few floors away. She thought of giving Lucia a better future, one where her mother wasn't an invisible ghost, but someone who had made a real difference. That image of a different future for her daughter was the final catalyst. She raised her head, and this time she met his eyes directly, without hesitation. Okay, she said, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with a new, trembling determination. I accept. I'll help you, sir. A smile of genuine relief and satisfaction lit up Alejandro's face. Excellent. You won't regret this. And please, don't call me sir. My name is Alejandro. He stood and returned to his imposing desk. Now, not a barrier, but his command center for this sudden new mission. As of this moment, you no longer work for the cleaning department. Leave the cart right there. Don't worry about it. I'll speak with Carmen personally to explain the situation. On Monday, when you arrive, don't go down to the basement. Report directly to this floor. My personal assistant, Marina, will be waiting for you. We'll set you up in a temporary office near mine, and she'll provide you with a computer, a company phone, and everything you need to get started. We will draw up a formal contract for this special project, with a salary that reflects your new and important responsibilities. Your only job now is to think, to research, and to help me change this company for the better. Understood? Each word was a clear, concise instruction, but to Sophia, it sounded like the most beautiful, hopeful melody she had ever heard. Sophia left the office feeling as if she were floating several inches off the ground. She left her cleaning cart behind, the symbol of her old life, and walked through the lavish corridors of Innovatec, feeling like a completely different person, seeing the world through new eyes. When she reached the basement locker room to collect her personal belongings, she ran into Raquel, who was just finishing her shift. Raquel saw her arrive without her cart, ahead of schedule, and with a dazed expression. She immediately assumed the worst, which for her, of course, was the best. With a malicious, venomous smile, she leaned against a locker. Well, well, looks like the little princess finally got kicked to the curb. I warned you, didn't I? The ones who think they're special and go around playing the victim don't last long in this company. Sophia looked at her, but Raquel's words bounced off her harmlessly. She was wrapped in a bubble of disbelief and hope so thick that no poison could penetrate it. Without saying a word, she collected her bag and walked out of the locker room, leaving Raquel mid-sentence, utterly convinced she had just witnessed the satisfying and well-deserved downfall of her rival. When Sofia arrived at Isabel's apartment to pick up Lucia, she was still trembling, her mind in a state of absolute shock. Her neighbor, seeing her arrive so early and with the look of someone who had seen a ghost, immediately feared the worst. "What happened, dear? Did they fire you?" she asked, her voice filled with concern, as she handed over the peacefully sleeping baby. Sophia shook her head, unable to form words at first. She sat down on Isabel's small, worn sofa, and as she cradled her daughter, the entire story began to pour from her lips like an unstoppable torrent. She recounted everything: the phone call, Lucia's cries, the scene in the CIO's office, the terrifying arrival of Alejandro Montes, and finally, the incredible conversation that ended with a job offer. Isabel listened, her eyes wide, her expression shifting from panic to astonishment, and finally to a boundless joy that brought tears to her eyes. "But that's a miracle, Sophia, a true miracle," Isabel cried, pulling her into a fierce hug. "You deserve this more than anyone in the world. You're smart, you're strong, you're a hard worker. Of course you can do it. This is the opportunity of a lifetime, the chance for you and this little one to have the future you both deserve." The weekend was an emotional roller coaster for Sophia. On Friday night, she barely slept. Adrenaline and anxiety kept her awake, replaying every one of Alejandro's words in the darkness of her room. By Saturday, the panic truly began to set in. Her, a consultant, working on the fourth floor, the Olympus of Innovatec, the idea was dizzying, terrifying. Imposter syndrome hit her with the force of a hurricane. What would she wear? All her clothes were practical, cheap. How was she supposed to act in meetings with important people? What if she said something foolish and they all realized she was a fraud? She would look in the mirror and see only the cleaner, the single mother struggling to make ends meet. But then her gaze would fall on Lucia, gurgling happily in her crib, and a flame of determination would ignite within her once more. She couldn't afford to fail. For her daughter's sake, on Sunday, instead of letting fear consume her, she took action. She went to a second-hand shop and, with the little money she had, bought a couple of decent blouses and a pair of dress trousers. She spent the afternoon at the public library, frantically reading online articles about human resource management and corporate benefits, trying to arm herself with a sliver of knowledge so she wouldn't feel so desperately lost. At 8 in the morning, Sophia stood before the imposing main entrance of Innovatec, the same one she had always bypassed for the service entrance. She wore the trousers and one of the blouses she had bought, feeling as disguised and insecure as a little girl playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. With her heart hammering in her chest like a drum, she took a deep breath and, for the first time, walked through the revolving doors. She crossed the bright, bustling lobby, feeling the gazes of the suited employees on her, convinced they all knew she didn't belong. The receptionist gave her a look of mixed confusion and surprise when she stated her name and said she had an appointment on the fourth floor. "One moment, please." After a brief call, the receptionist's expression transformed completely, now tinged with a newfound respect. "Go ahead, Miss Vargas. The elevator on the right. They're expecting you." Miss Vargas echoed in her ears like a word from a foreign language. Upon reaching the fourth floor, an elegant and efficient woman, who introduced herself as Marina, Alejandro's assistant, greeted her with a professional smile. Welcome. Mr. Montes has briefed me on your joining the project. Follow me, please. I'll show you to your office. As Marina led her down the carpeted hallway toward a small but elegant office with a stunning view of the city, they passed Raquel, who was cleaning the glass of a meeting room. Raquel looked up at the sound of their footsteps and froze completely, her microfiber cloth suspended in midair. Her eyes widened as she saw Sofia. She wasn't in her cleaning uniform. She was wearing office clothes. She wasn't pushing a cart. She was walking beside the CEO's personal assistant as if she were just another executive. For a moment, Raquel's brain couldn't process the scene. The woman she thought had been humiliatingly fired on Friday was now in the company's inner sanctum. The initial confusion quickly gave way to a wave of disbelief, which in turn transformed into a cold, venomous rage. The only possible explanation her bitter, twisted mind could conjure was the most sordid one of all. Sofia hadn't been fired. She'd been promoted, and not for her work, but for sleeping with the boss. In that instant, the envy she felt for Sofia mutated into a profound hatred, and she resolved that, whatever the cost, she would unmask the social climber and destroy her. Sofia's new office, though small by fourth floor standards, was a palace of possibilities to her. It had a window with a view, a light wood desk, and an ergonomic chair that seemed to embrace her. Marina left her with a laptop, a phone, and a notepad with her name printed at the top. Sofia Vargas, Corporate Wellbeing Project. Sofia traced her printed name with her fingertips as if it were a sacred relic, tangible proof that this was all real. A short while later, Alejandro entered the office, closing the door behind him for privacy. Well, how are you feeling? Terrified and deeply grateful, she answered with a sincerity that resonated with him. Perfect, he said with a smile. Use that fear to stay sharp and the gratitude to stay motivated. Your first task isn't to write reports or analyze spreadsheets. Your first task is to talk. I want you to talk to your former cleaning colleagues, to the maintenance staff, to the administrative assistants. I want you to listen to their stories, their struggles, their needs, in total and absolute confidence, of course. No one needs to know you're working directly for me. You're one of them. They'll trust you in a way they would never trust an outside consultant. Gather the truth, Sofia. That is your mission. Give me the ammunition I need to make real change. As Sofia began to map out a mental plan for her incredible new mission down in the basement, Raquel was already deploying her own dark strategy. During the coffee break, gathered with two other cleaners and a maintenance worker in the gloomy employee and cafeteria, she threw her first poised dart. She did it with studied nonchalance, as if commenting on the weather. Hey, has anyone seen Sofia today? She asked, stirring her coffee with theatrical slowness. I thought she was fired on Friday, but I swear I just saw her upstairs, on the fourth floor, and not in uniform, no. Dressed like an executive, walking cool as you please with the boss's assistant. The others looked at her, their faces a mixture of surprise and curiosity. How strange, said one. Funny how some people manage to climb so fast in this company, isn't it? Raquel continued, letting the malicious sentence hang in the air. She didn't need to say more. The seed of suspicion and envy had been planted in perfectly fertile ground. She knew the story, embellished and magnified with each retelling, would spread through the lower floors of Innovatec like wildfire, and all she would have to do was fan the flames from time to time. Over the next 2 weeks, Sofia immersed herself completely in her new task with a dedication that surprised even Alejandro. She used the laptop in her new office, but went down to the basements and lower floors, armed only with a notebook and a pen, knowing instinctively that technology would intimidate the people she needed to talk to. She started with Carmen, who became her most valuable ally, arranging small, discreet meetings and helping her break the ice with the others. At first, her former colleagues looked at her with suspicion. Why was one of them suddenly asking questions? Was she a spy for management? But Sophia spoke to them from the heart, sharing her own struggles as one of them and assuring them their stories would be safe with her, that her only goal was to make things better for everyone. Little by little, the barriers crumbled. She heard stories of mothers skipping meals to buy medicine for their children, of maintenance workers pulling double shifts to pay the rent, of the anguish of not being able to afford a dentist. Each story was a stab to Sophia's heart, but also fuel for her determination. Every afternoon at 5, Sophia met with Alejandro in his office to report on her progress. At first, the meetings were formal and strictly professional. She would read from her notebook, summarizing the day's conversations with a clarity and empathy that impressed him. He listened in silence, absorbing every word, his respect for her growing exponentially with each report. He saw how she could transform people's pain and frustration into actionable data, into irrefutable arguments for change. However, as the days went by, the dynamic began to subtly change. The meetings started to run longer. After discussing the project, he would ask about Lucia, how she had slept the night before, if she was teething yet. She, in turn, dared to ask if he'd had a good day. They began to speak not just as a boss and his consultant, but as two people. They shared a coffee and sometimes a genuine laugh. Sophia began to see past the millionaire CEO to the lonely man beneath, and he began to see in the struggling mother a woman of extraordinary intelligence and strength. But while a genuine, respectful connection blossomed in the protected atmosphere of the fourth floor, on the levels below, Raquel's poison was spreading and taking effect. Raquel realized that for the rumor to have a real impact, it needed to reach beyond the cleaning and maintenance staff. Her next target was Monica, a secretary in the finance department, known throughout the company for her sharp tongue and insatiable love of gossip. Raquel approached her in the cafeteria with a practiced expression of false concern. Monica, I'm so worried, she began, lowering her voice as if sharing a state secret. You know I'm only telling you this because I trust your discretion. It's about this new girl, Sofia, the one working with the boss now. I've seen things. The other day, I stayed late and saw Mr. Montes's car in the private lot long after everyone had gone. And what a coincidence. She left very late too. And it's not the first time. I feel sorry for the boss, you know? He seems like such a lonely man. And she seems so calculating. A single mother with nothing. It's the perfect story to trap a rich, lonely man. Raquel had cast her most venomous bait, mixing a kernel of truth. They both worked late with a malicious lie. And she knew perfectly well that Monica would take it and spread the story throughout the entire company. And so she did. In less than a week, The atmosphere around Sophia had become palpably and suffocatingly toxic. She began to notice it in small, painful details: forced smiles that didn't reach the eyes, uncomfortable silences that fell like a shroud whenever she entered a room, whispers that stopped abruptly when she passed, leaving a trail of hostility in their wake. Some of the very people who had tearfully told her their most intimate stories now barely greeted her, their gazes filled with a new distrust, or worse, a cold contempt. One day, as she was getting a coffee, she clearly heard two administrative employees whisper, "They say she seduced him in his own office the day she brought the baby in. That's why he gave her the job." Sophia felt as though she'd been slapped in the face in public. At first, she tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just envy, the inevitable price of her incredible luck. But the comments grew more frequent and cruel. People no longer saw her project as a well-being initiative, but as the whim of the boss's mistress, and her as a usurper. The poison of the rumors didn't just affect her morale. It began to directly sabotage her work. Doors that had cautiously opened for her now slammed shut in her face. When she approached employees for the confidential interviews that were the foundation of her entire project, she was met with vague excuses, evasive glances, and outright refusals. "Sorry, I'm really busy right now. I don't think I have anything interesting to contribute." The confidence she had worked so hard to build had evaporated, replaced by an invisible wall of suspicion and judgment. How could she help people if people no longer wanted to talk to her? She felt powerless, watching her project, her one chance at a future, crumble because of malicious lies. At night, she would come home with an anguish so deep it prevented her from fully enjoying her time with Lucia. The initial joy of her new position had turned into a heavy, lonely burden. She began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Perhaps Raquel was right. Perhaps she didn't belong in this world. And this was the brutal punishment for having dared to dream of something better. After a particularly humiliating morning, in which three people canceled their meetings with her at the last minute with flimsy excuses, Sophia knew she couldn't go on like this. The situation was untenable. Ignoring the rumors was no longer an option. They were destroying her professionally and personally, and they were killing the project before it could even be born. With a mix of rage, frustration, and profound desperation, she made a decision. She had to talk to Alejandro. She couldn't wait for their scheduled afternoon meeting. She needed to confront him now. She marched from her small office to the CEO's imposing suite, each step on the carpeted hallway fueling her determination. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say, only that she had to face him. Did he know? Did he have any idea what people whispered behind his back? And if he did, why had he done nothing? The fear of his reaction was immense, but the pain of the injustice was greater still. She stood before the dark wooden door, the same one she had passed through with so much fear and hope. She took a deep breath. Raising a trembling hand, she knocked, not like a timid employee, but like a woman demanding answers. "Come in," Alejandro's voice answered from within. Sophia pushed the door open and stepped inside. He was focused on his computer and looked up, surprised to see her there outside of their scheduled meeting time. His initial welcoming smile vanished the moment he saw the storm of anguish on her face. "Sophia, what is it? You look—" "They think I'm your mistress." The words tumbled out, stronger than she intended, as if a dam had burst. The tears she had been fighting to hold back finally spilled over, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. They think this project is a sham, a pretext to keep me close. They look at me with contempt. They whisper behind my back. They refuse to speak to me because they think I'm some kind of tramp. My work, the work you entrusted to me, is impossible to do because no one trusts me. I've become an outcast. I want you to tell me the truth, please. Did you know this was happening? Did you know what they were saying about us? Her voice broke at the end, the question heavy with the weight of the betrayal she feared she would uncover. Alejandro was speechless for a moment. The impact of her words struck him like a physical blow. He rose from his chair, his face a mask of disbelief that quickly hardened into a cold, controlled fury. No, he said. His voice was a low, dangerous growl that seemed to vibrate in the air. I had no idea it had come to this. I was a complete fool. I should have anticipated people's pettiness and envy, but I was so focused on the goal that I was blind to the social consequences for you. I am sorry, Sophia. I am deeply sorry for exposing you to this filth. He walked toward her. His proximity was both intimidating and strangely comforting. But make no mistake, we are not going to surrender. We will not let the gossips and the cowards win. Their reaction only proves how toxic the environment here is and how absolutely necessary this change is. This is no longer just a corporate wellness project. This is a battle, and I swear to you, you will not fight it alone. We are going to face this together, and we are going to win. His declaration wasn't a simple promise from a boss. It was an oath of loyalty, a pact sealed in the midst of crisis. Alejandro's words, charged with a protective ferocity she had never witnessed, left her breathless. No one in her entire life had ever defended her like that. She was used to fighting her battles in silence and solitude, to absorbing the blows and moving on. To see the anger in his eyes, an anger directed not at her, but in her defense, was overwhelming and strangely healing. The tears of frustration transformed into tears of a deep, trembling relief. She finally felt she was not alone in the trenches. Okay, she whispered, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, the word together echoing in her mind. Together, Alejandro nodded, his strategist's mind already racing. And we're going to start right now. Tomorrow morning, I will send an official memo to the entire company announcing the corporate wellness project. I will publicly name you as the project analyst. We are going to legitimize your role in a way so official and undeniable that the rumors will look like what they are: absurd, malicious gossip from mediocre people. We're not going to hide Sophia. We're going to put you in the spotlight. We will showcase your work and your worth. We will force them to respect you. That night, Sophia returned home feeling strangely empowered, as though she were wearing a new invisible armor. For the first time in ages, she felt she could win this battle. But fate, always capricious and sometimes cruel, decided to put their new alliance to an immediate test of fire. During the night, Lucía began to burn with fever. It wasn't a simple cold. It was a high, alarming fever that wouldn't break with cool cloths or children's paracetamol. The little girl cried with a faint, heart-wrenching whimper that tore Sophia's soul apart. At 3 in the morning, utterly desperate, she wrapped her in a blanket and rushed to the nearest public emergency room. The waiting room was packed, a chaos of coughs and cries, and they gave her a number that meant at least a 4 or 5 hour wait. Lucia's fever kept climbing. Panic seized Sophia. Isabel wasn't answering her phone. She was alone. And then, in the depths of her despair, she remembered Alejandro's words, "You will not fight it alone." With trembling hands, she dialed his number, a terrible shame washing over her for bothering him at such an hour. But her daughter's life was more important than any formality. "Alejandro, I'm so sorry for the hour," she stammered when he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "It's Sofia. It's Lucia. She has a very high fever, and I don't know what to do." On the other end of the line, Alejandro sat bolt upright in bed, sleep vanishing instantly as he heard the raw panic in Sofia's voice. There was not a hint of annoyance in his tone, only immediate, protective alertness. "Where are you exactly, Sophia?" he asked, with an authoritative calm that belied the urgency he felt. "At the public hospital, downtown, in the emergency room. But there are so many people. They said it will be hours before they can see us. And Lucia's fever won't go down." "All right, listen to me carefully. Go out to the main entrance right now. Get a taxi. There is a top-tier private children's hospital, San Lucas, 10 minutes from where you are. Tell the driver to take you there. I will call ahead so they are expecting you at the emergency entrance. Don't worry about the money. Don't even think about it right now. I'll take care of everything. I'm leaving my house now. I'll meet you there." He hung up before Sophia could protest or let her pride get in the way. In less than 5 minutes, he was dressed and descending in the elevator of his luxury building, his mind, normally occupied with figures and projections, now focused on a single, overwhelming priority: a frightened mother and her sick child. Half an hour later, Sophia walked through the automatic doors of the bright, silent pediatric emergency room at San Lucas Hospital. The contrast with the chaos, the noise, and the smell of cheap disinfectant of the public hospital was overwhelming, almost obscene. A nurse with a kind smile was waiting for her at the entrance. "Miss Vargas, this way, please. Dr. Mendez is waiting for you." Lucia was taken to a private room immediately, where the pediatrician, a middle-aged man with a calming presence, began to examine her with an efficiency and gentleness that nearly made Sophia weep with relief. She felt caught between immense gratitude and a stabbing sense of guilt. She was abusing Alejandro's generosity in a way she had never imagined. Just then, he appeared at the door. He wasn't wearing a suit, but jeans and a dark sweater, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like a worried family member. "What did the doctor say?" he asked in a low voice, coming closer and placing a comforting hand on Sophia's shoulder. She flinched at the contact, but didn't pull away. In that moment, in the sterile hospital room, sharing the fear and the weight, they ceased to be boss and employee forever. A short time later, Dr. Mendez returned with a reassuring smile that was like a balm to Sophia's soul. "There's nothing to worry about, as I suspected. It's acute otitis, a rather severe ear infection. It's very painful for babies, which is why she wouldn't stop crying and was refusing her bottle. But with the right treatment, it's not serious. We've given her a painkiller and have already started the first dose of antibiotics. In 48 hours, she should be a different child." Sophia felt her knees buckle from sheer relief and had to lean against the wall. closing her eyes as tears, this time of gratitude, streamed freely down her face. When the doctor left, she turned to Alejandro, her face a mixture of thankfulness and mortification. Alejandro, I don't know how I can ever repay you for all this. The consultation, the medicine. He cut her off, placing his hands gently on her shoulders and looking directly into her eyes. Sophia, listen to me. We are not going to talk about money, ever. Lucia's health is the only thing that matters right now. Understood? He added with a faint smile to lighten the tension. Consider it part of the new corporate benefits program. The first benefit is the CEO personally ensuring his employees and their children are safe and sound. It's an investment, not an expense. Once they were discharged, with a prescription and medication in a bag, Alejandro insisted on driving them home in his car. When they reached the hospital's underground parking garage, Sofia saw that in the back seat of Alejandro's elegant black sedan, a state-of-the-art baby seat was perfectly installed and ready to use. She stared at it, stunned. "What is this?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "I bought it last week," he admitted, shrugging as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "I thought it might be useful to have, just in case of an emergency." The ride home was silent, but it was a comfortable, intimate silence, filled with unspoken words. With Lucia sleeping peacefully in her new, safe car seat, medicated and finally free of pain, Sofia watched Alejandro's profile out of the corner of her eye as he drove through the city lights. She saw the concentration in his jaw, the gentleness of his hands on the steering wheel. She no longer saw the all-powerful CEO or a charitable benefactor. She saw a good, protective, and surprisingly tender man. And with a pang of panic that squeezed her heart, she realized that what she felt for him was no longer just gratitude. It was something much deeper, something dangerous and thrilling that was beginning to blossom in the fertile ground of their shared crisis. When they arrived at Sofia's modest apartment building, Alejandro turned off the engine and turned to look at her in the dim light of the car. "I'll help you up." It was not a quest, was not a question, but a quiet, non-negotiable statement. Sophia, too tired and emotionally overwhelmed to argue or feel ashamed of her humble home, simply nodded. He unbuckled the sleeping Lucia from the car seat with a surprising gentleness and cradled her in his arms as if he had been doing it his whole life, while Sophia gathered the bag of medicines and the baby's diaper bag. As he stepped into the small two-bedroom apartment, Alejandro paused for a moment in the doorway, taking in the surroundings. It wasn't poverty he saw, but a home. Despite its small size and simple, worn furniture, every corner was immaculate and filled with a palpable love. He saw the small photos of Lucia held by magnets on the fridge, the handmade felt bird mobile hanging over the crib, and the warmth of the small knitted blanket resting on the sofa. In this humble space, there was more life and authenticity than in his entire designer penthouse overlooking the city. He felt strangely at peace, as if he had reached a safe harbor after a long and lonely storm. Sophia laid Lucia in her crib with infinite delicacy, and the baby didn't even stir, lost in a deep, healing sleep, finally free from pain. When she returned to the small living room, she found Alejandro standing, looking at a modest bookshelf with her few books and a framed photo of her, pregnant and smiling at the camera. The atmosphere was charged with a new, unfamiliar intimacy that was both comforting and terrifying. Would you like a glass of water or a tea? I'm sorry, I don't have much else to. She trailed off, suddenly feeling like a host in her own territory. Water is fine, thank you, he replied, not taking his eyes off the photo. As she moved around the tiny kitchen, he finally spoke, his voice more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. I've never been in a place like this, he said, and it was clear he wasn't referring to the size or the lack of luxury. My house is a space, a place where I sleep. This is a home. Seeing you and Lucia, seeing how you face everything with such strength, it's made me realize how empty my own life is. I've built an empire, but I haven't built anything that truly matters. He turned to look at her, and in his eyes was a loneliness so profound, Sofia felt her own heart ache in response. She handed him the glass of water, their fingers brushing for a fleeting instant, a contact that sent an electric current through them both. She leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing her arms, not as a defensive barrier, but to contain the wave of emotions washing over her. Seeing him so vulnerable, the fear and intimidation she felt towards him evaporated completely, replaced by an unexpected and profound empathy. You think you haven't built anything that matters, she said softly, and the formal tone she'd once used with him suddenly sounded strange and out of place in the intimacy of her small living room. But every day, more than 200 people go to work at your company, 230 families who can pay their rent, buy food, and send their children to school because of an idea you had in the empire you built. That's not nothing, Alejandro. That's a lifeline for so many people, myself included. Perhaps you just need someone to remind you of that from time to time. Her words were simple, direct, yet they held a wisdom born from necessity, a perspective that Alejandro, from his ivory tower, had completely lost. He looked at her, utterly astonished. He set the glass of water down on the counter, untouched, and took a step toward her, closing the small distance that separated them in the tiny room. They were so close now that Sophia could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes and feel the warmth radiating from his body. The air grew dense, electric, charged with everything left unsaid. Sophia, he whispered, his voice hoarse with an emotion he could no longer suppress. She raised a hand, hesitating for a second that felt like an eternity, and then, with infinite gentleness, she brushed a lock of hair from his face, her fingers grazing his cheek. The contact was like a spark, igniting something they had both been trying to ignore for days. Sophia held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was looking at her, not as a boss, not as a benefactor, but as a man looks at the woman who is beginning to change his entire world. Slowly, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion or of desire, but something much deeper. It was a kiss of gratitude, of recognition, a tender, hesitant kiss that sealed the emotional connection that had been born between them in the midst of crisis and vulnerability. In the other room, Lucia sighed in her sleep as if giving her blessing. When they pulled apart, the air between them vibrated, thick with a silent charge. Sophia leaned against the kitchen counter, her knees feeling weak. The taste of him was still on her lips, a mixture of coffee and an emotion she could not name. Her mind was a whirlwind of joy and panic. What had just happened? What did this mean for her future, for her job, for her daughter? She looked at Alejandro, searching his face for answers. He seemed as stunned as she was, but in his eyes there was not a shadow of regret, only a deep, serene certainty. Sophia, he said, his voice a ragged whisper. I'm sorry if that was too impulsive, but I think I've been wanting to do that since the day I saw you in my office, sitting on that couch with Lucia. You showed me a world I didn't know existed, and since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. It wasn't a declaration of eternal love from a movie, but it was something far more important. It was an honest confession, raw and vulnerable. He was telling her that his feelings were real, that this wasn't a whim of the moment, but something that had been growing inside him, strong and silent. And for Sophia, who had only ever known abandonment and indifference, that honesty was worth more than any poem. The weeks that followed were a bittersweet whirlwind. On one hand, the relationship between Sophia and Alejandro blossomed into an open secret. They continued to work on the project with impeccable professionalism during the day, but their gazes would meet over documents with a new intensity. Their meetings often ended with personal conversations that stretched late into the evening. They began sharing quiet dinners, sometimes in her small apartment, where he learned to change diapers and soothe Lucia to sleep with an endearing clumsiness, and other times in his penthouse, a world of luxury that felt like another planet to Sophia. But this bubble of happiness was surrounded by an increasingly toxic swamp at work. Raquel, more observant and venomous than ever, noted their late departures and the complicity in their glances. For her, every gesture of closeness was irrefutable proof of her theory. The whispers turned into open accusations in the office cliques, and the image of Sophia as a social climber solidified in the minds of many. Sophia's happiness was fragile, built on a minefield that Raquel was determined to detonate, regardless of the consequences. After nearly 2 months of intense work, Sophia's report was ready. It was a 50-page document filled not only with data and statistics, but with the anonymous, heartbreaking stories she had collected, a brutal testament to the silent struggles within the company. When she presented it to Alejandro, he read it in complete silence for nearly an hour. When he finished, he looked at her with undisguised admiration. This is brilliant, Sophia. It's more powerful than any audit report I've ever read in my life. But he knew a simple document wasn't enough to quell the rumors and the contempt she was enduring. They needed to make a statement. I want you to be the one to present these findings, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Not to me, to the entire executive committee, to all the company directors. Next week. The blood ran cold in Sophia's veins. Me? Speak in front of all the directors? Alejandro, I can't. I'll be terrified. Yes, you can, he insisted, his faith in her unshakable. We'll spend the entire weekend preparing together. I'll help you create a presentation, organize your ideas. You know this material better than anyone. Your voice is the one they need to hear. It's the only way they'll see you as the professional you are. News of Sofia's upcoming presentation to the executive committee spread through the halls of Innovatec like wildfire. When it reached Raquel's ears, she knew she had to play her final card, and it had to be decisive. Rumors were no longer enough. She needed an atomic bomb that would destroy everything. She spent an entire night drafting an anonymous letter, carefully crafted to sound like the complaint of an employee, concerned about the company's ethics and future. In it, she detailed every piece of her evidence with malicious precision: the constant closed-door meetings, the late and simultaneous departures from the parking garage, Sophia's inexplicable promotion, and she even mentioned a suspicious and very expensive late-night encounter at a private hospital. She printed 2 copies. One she sent to the Human Resources Department. The other, the more important one, she sent directly to the private residence of Carlos Armengol, the oldest and most conservative member of the board of directors, a man known for his rigidity and his obsession with corporate governance and conflicts of interest. Raquel had planted her mine. Now, all she had to do was wait for someone to step on it. On the morning of the presentation, the air on the 4th floor was electric. Sofia, dressed in a simple but professional second-hand suit that had cost her a fortune, reviewed her notes one last time, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm that threatened to break free from her chest. Alejandro came into her office to offer some encouragement. His presence was a source of calm. "You're ready. Just tell them the truth. Your truth," he said with a reassuring smile. But just as they were about to head to the committee room, Marina, Alejandro's assistant, burst into the office, her face pale, her expression urgent. "Alejandro, Mr. Armengol is on the line. He has just called an emergency meeting with the board, right now, in the main conference room. He has postponed the project presentation and has explicitly requested your presence. And yours, Sofia? And the Director of Human Resources." Alejandro's brow furrowed, a storm gathering in his eyes. "The reason?" Marina swallowed hard. "To discuss a formal complaint regarding a possible conflict of interest and inappropriate executive conduct." In that instant, they both knew. Raquel's bomb had just exploded. When they entered the main boardroom, the atmosphere was so glacial that Sofia felt she couldn't breathe. Carlos Armengol, a man in his 70s with a gaze of steel and a reputation for being implacable, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. Beside him was the Director of Human Resources, her expression neutral but uncomfortable, along with another board member. On the table in front of him lay the anonymous letter, and sitting in a chair in the corner, wearing an expression of civic-minded concern, was Raquel. She had been called as the primary witness. Sofia felt her legs give way. This wasn't a meeting. It was a trial, and she was the one on the stand. "Mr. Montes, Ms. Vargas, please have a seat," Armengol said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We have received a very serious anonymous complaint that calls into question the integrity of this company's leadership." He picked up the letter and, with theatrical slowness, began to read aloud the most venomous excerpts. "An inappropriate relationship that has resulted in blatant favoritism, the use of company resources for personal matters, a promotion based on criteria unrelated to professionalism, damaging the morale of other employees." Each word was a hammer blow to Sofia's soul. She was trapped. Alejandro let Armengol finish reading, allowing the letter's poison to fill the silence in the room. Sofia felt small, transparent, crushed by the weight of the accusations. But Alejandro did not seem intimidated in the slightest. He leaned back calmly in his chair. He looked Carlos Armengol directly in the eye, and then he spoke with a glacial calm that was more intimidating than any shout. Carlos, thank you for bringing this matter to my attention, and thank you to the anonymous author of this letter for illustrating my point so perfectly. Allow me to be absolutely clear, so there are no misunderstandings. Do I have personal feelings for Ms. Vargas? Yes, absolutely. I have come to admire her intelligence, her strength, and her integrity in a way that goes beyond the purely professional. A murmur rippled through the room. Raquel smiled, believing he had just walked into her trap. But, Alejandro continued, his voice rising, you are mistaken if you believe that is the story. The real story is that this letter, this poison, is the clearest symptom of the disease I have discovered in my own company. A disease that Ms. Vargas, and only she, has helped me diagnose. The project I assigned her was not a pretext for a romance. It was a desperate attempt to understand why we have a work culture where envy and frustration run so deep that people resort to this instead of asking for help. She is not the cause of the problem. She is the key to the solution. Alejandro's words completely shifted the energy in the room. The focus moved from a sordid scandal to a profound corporate self-examination. Inspired by his courage and feeling she had nothing left to lose, Sofia felt a strange new strength surge within her. She was no longer the frightened victim. She was the bearer of the stories of the forgotten. Mr. Armengol, with your permission, may I say something? She asked, her voice surprisingly firm and clear. Armengol, completely taken aback by the turn of events, could only nod. Sofia stood up. She did not look at Raquel. She fixed her gaze on the powerful members of the board. I am not here to talk about my personal life. I am here to talk about my work. For the last 2 months, I have spoken with dozens of your employees. I have listened to mothers who cannot afford to take their children to the doctor. I have seen older men with broken hands who are afraid to request sick leave for fear of being fired. I have consoled young people who see no future in this company beyond a miserable paycheck. The problem here is not whether my boss looks at me favorably. The problem is that this company has been blind for years to the most basic needs of its people. And that is the data I came to present to you today. With a clarity and passion that stunned everyone present, she began to lay out the conclusions of her report. No notes, no slides, just the irrefutable force of the truth. For 10 minutes, that felt like an eternity. Sofia spoke without stopping. Her voice, at first firm and clear, became filled with emotion as she recounted the anonymous stories of her colleagues, painting a vivid and heartbreaking picture of the reality on the lower floors of the building. There was no accusation in her words, only an honest, almost journalistic exposition of the truth. When she finished, a heavy, overwhelming silence filled the boardroom. No one dared to move or breathe. Carlos Armengol, the man of steel, had a distant look in his eyes, as if he were seeing the ghost of his company for the first time. The juicy scandal he had come looking for to weaken Alejandro had vanished. replaced by a mirror reflecting a very ugly image of his own legacy. He slowly turned his head like a predator toward Raquel, who had shrunk in her chair, her expression of civic righteousness replaced by one of pure panic. "And you?" Armengol asked, his voice a frigid blade that cut through the air. "You, who claim to be so concerned with the ethics of this company. Have you ever once concerned yourself with the well-being of your colleagues? Or is your concern only activated when you believe someone might be receiving something you feel you deserve?" Raquel opened her mouth, stammered, but no words came out. Her malice had been laid bare for all to see. "This meeting is over," Carlos Armengol finally declared, rising to his feet with an authority that made everyone sit up straight. His withering gaze landed on Raquel. "Ma'am, your complaint is dismissed as baseless, malicious, and frankly, pathetic. The Human Resources Department will take the appropriate disciplinary action regarding your conduct, which I consider a disgrace to this company." Raquel went as white as the wall, knowing her career at Innovatec was over. Then Armengol turned to Alejandro. "Alejandro, I apologize. Sometimes old men like me forget to look beyond the balance sheets." Finally, his eyes rested on Sofia, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of genuine admiration in them. "Ms. Vargas, your project is not only approved, it is now a strategic priority for this board. As of today, you have a green light to implement every one of your proposals. Starting with the daycare, present a detailed budget tomorrow. I want the first stone laid next month." Sofia felt the air rush back into her lungs, a wave of impossible relief. She hadn't just survived, she had won. Stepping out of the boardroom, the heavy door clicking shut behind her, Sofia leaned against the hallway wall, feeling her legs tremble uncontrollably. The adrenaline that had sustained her for the last hour abandoned her all at once, leaving her dizzy, weak, and utterly exhausted. Alejandro stood before her, blocking the view of anyone who might pass. His body was a protective shield. "Are you all right?" She looked up, and upon seeing the immense, overflowing pride in his expression, she burst into tears. But this time, they were tears of pure, absolute, and incredible relief. Not caring that they were in the middle of a corridor on the company's most important floor, he wrapped his arms around her in a firm, protective embrace. "You did it," he whispered in her ear, his voice vibrating with emotion. "You did incredibly well, Sofia. You were brave, eloquent, and powerful. I have never been prouder of anyone in my entire life." She clung to him, burying her face in his chest, inhaling his scent, feeling for the first time in her life completely safe and defended. They had entered that room as suspects, and they had emerged as the architects of the company's future. Together. That evening, to celebrate their victory, Alejandro didn't take her to an expensive, ostentatious restaurant. Instead, he appeared at her apartment door with 2 bags full of fresh ingredients from the market. "Tonight, the CEO cooks for his star advisor," he announced with a smile that lit up his entire face. While Sofia gave Lucía her bath and put her to bed, he moved about the small kitchen with surprising ease and confidence, filling the apartment with the delicious aroma of garlic, basil, and fresh tomatoes. Later, the three of them sat on a blanket on the living room floor, eating pasta straight from their plates as if it were the most luxurious picnic in the world. Lucia, sitting on Alejandro's lap, tried to catch spaghetti with her chubby little hands, smearing sauce on herself and on him in the process, and all three of them laughed out loud. It was a scene of such simple, perfect domesticity that Sophia's heart ached with pure happiness. There were no more barriers between them. They weren't boss and employee, nor rich and poor. They were just Sophia and Alejandro and little Lucia, who already looked at him as if he had always been a part of her life's landscape. Later, when the kitchen was clean and Lucia was sleeping soundly in her crib, they sat together on the small sofa. The exhaustion of the week suddenly settled in, but it was a good kind of tired, the weariness of a battle won, of a harbor reached. Alejandro took Sophia's hand in his, their fingers lacing together naturally. Sophia, he began, what happened today at the company? The victory, the project, all of that is important, but I've realized it's not the most important thing. For years, I've lived exclusively for my work, believing that success was all that mattered. But in these last few months, you and Lucia have taught me that I was fundamentally wrong. You've taught me what a home is. You've given me a real purpose, something truly worth fighting for. His voice broke with emotion. He released her hand, slid off the sofa, and to Sophia's astonishment, knelt before her on the floor of her modest living room. He pulled a small, blue velvet box from his pocket. I don't want to be just your boss or your project partner, and I don't want to be just your boyfriend. I want to be your husband. I want to be a father to Lucia in every sense of the word. Sofia Vargas, will you marry me? Tears welled in Sophia's eyes once more that night, but this time they were tears of a happiness so pure and overwhelming she could barely breathe. She looked at the man kneeling before her, the man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, who had defended her with the ferocity of a lion, and who loved her daughter as if she were his own. There was no doubt in her heart, not a shred of fear, only an absolute and radiant certainty. Yes, she whispered, her voice broken with emotion. Yes, Alejandro. Of course, yes. 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, a simple yet elegant diamond that seemed to glow with its own light, even in the dim room. It was a perfect fit. They held each other with a force that sealed every promise in the world. Laughing and crying at the same time, they talked for hours until dawn. They talked about the wedding, which would be small and intimate, about the house with a garden he wanted to buy so Lucia could play on the grass, and about the Innovatec daycare, which had now become a symbol of their own story of love and resilience. There was no more uncertainty, only a bright, shared future they had built together against all odds. 3 months later, on a sunny autumn afternoon, Sofia Vargas became Sofia Montes in a simple, intimate, and overwhelmingly emotional civil ceremony held in the small garden of the house they had just bought together. There were no hundreds of high society guests, no gossip-hungry press, only the handful of people who truly mattered. Isabel, who cried with the emotion of a mother. Carmen, who watched the couple with a smile of deep satisfaction. And little Lucia, who, in a white dress with a flower in her hair, crawled down the grass aisle as the world's most adorable flower girl. For Alejandro, who was accustomed to the grand, luxurious, and emotionally empty weddings of his social circle, that day was the most real and meaningful of his entire life. As he placed the ring on Sophia's finger, He saw in her eyes the reflection of his true future, a future filled with a love based not on status or money, but on mutual respect and shared struggle. A few miles away, on the second floor of Innovatec, workers began to raise the walls of what would become the Lucía Daycare Center, the first and most visible symbol of the change they had started together. A year later, on a bright Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of their new home. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with that of pancakes, which Alejandro was attempting to flip with more enthusiasm than skill, under the amused gaze of his wife. Sofia, now the respected director of corporate wellness at Innovatec, was reading a story to Lucia, who was now 2 years old and chasing butterflies in the garden. Raquel had been dismissed the day after the board meeting, and no one at the company ever heard from her again. The Innovatec daycare was a resounding success, and the innovative work-life balance policies Sofia had designed had completely transformed the company's culture, making it a model for the industry. Alejandro was still the CEO, but he was a different man. He left the office at 5 o'clock sharp every day, delegated more, and smiled with a frequency his old business partners would not have recognized. He had discovered that true success wasn't measured in balance sheets, but in moments exactly like this. A sunny morning, the sound of his daughter's laughter, and the hand of the woman he loved intertwined with his own. The story of Sofia and Alejandro became a kind of legend within Innovatec. Over time, it was no longer malicious gossip, but a tale of resilience that older employees told with a mixture of awe and admiration. It became a constant reminder to everyone, from executives to new interns, that talent and courage could be found in the most unexpected places, and that listening was infinitely more important than commanding. Carmen, who had been promoted to head of general services on Alejandro's direct recommendation, often shared the short version of the story with new employees, not as gossip, but as a lesson in integrity and the importance of helping one another. The culture of fear and suspicion that Raquel had tried to foster had withered, slowly replaced by an atmosphere of greater respect and communication. Sophia's project had expanded to include scholarships for the children of lower income employees and an emergency fund for medical situations, all managed from her ever growing department. That same night, a small cry from Lucia's room woke them both at the same time. The little girl had had a nightmare. Together, moving in the perfect synchrony born of habit and love, they got up and went to her room. Alejandro picked her up, rocking her gently and whispering soothing words in her ear until her sobs turned back into even breaths. Sofia, standing in the doorway, watched the scene. The man who ran a multi-million-dollar empire was now completely devoted to calming his daughter's small, nocturnal fear. In that very instant, she saw the full circle of their incredible journey. She remembered the desperation of that morning in her tiny apartment, the terror in his office, the anguish in the emergency room. And now, here she was, in her own home, with the man she loved and her daughter safe in his arms. Their story hadn't been a fairy tale where the prince rescues Cinderella. It had been something far more real, and therefore far more beautiful. It was a story of two people from opposite worlds who met in a moment of crisis, and instead of turning their backs, they decided to build a bridge. And upon that bridge, brick by brick, they built a home. Because in the end, true love doesn't always arrive with fireworks or in the perfect circumstances we see in movies. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in an unexpected act of kindness in a boss's office, in the shared vulnerability of a cold hospital room, or in the brutal honesty of a conversation in a humble living room. Sophia didn't need a Prince Charming to rescue her from a tower. She was already a queen, fighting every day for her own small kingdom. And Alejandro didn't need a princess of his own social standing to validate his success. He desperately needed someone to remind him how to feel, how to live beyond the confines of his glass empire. They didn't find each other to become whole, because in their own ways, they already were. They found each other to be seen, to be validated, and to build something entirely new, something that was infinitely greater and stronger than the sum of its parts. Their story proved that the highest barriers are not those of money or social class, but those of fear and prejudice, and that those barriers can be demolished by the unstoppable force of empathy and love. And so concludes our story for today, a story that reminds us that behind every anonymous face in the crowd, there is a battle, a dream, and an incredible capacity to love and to overcome. We hope the journey of Sofia, Alejandro, and little Lucia has touched your heart as much as telling it has touched our souls. Love, in its purest form, is and always will be a revolutionary force, capable of transforming not only lives, but companies and entire worlds. Thank you for joining us until the end of this tale. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a comment telling us which part moved you the most, and as always, from what corner of the world you've joined us. Your interactions are the engine that drives us to keep finding and sharing these stories that prove to us that, despite everything, goodness and love always find a way. Until next time.